Welcome to Saturday of week 7 after Ascension and the week before Pentecost. Our readings, or our reading from the Acts of the Apostles today encourages us to recognize that there were no exceptions in the early church to people who could be recognized and welcomed and heralded. We hear about Apollos. Apollos was Jewish. He was from Alexandria, which was the second most important city in the Roman Empire, absolutely fundamental for trade between Egypt and the rest of the Roman Empire. Trade in particular in grain, which in those days was absolutely important. And so he is Jewish, he comes from Alexandria, well away from Jerusalem. The church is spreading, and people who come from different parts of the world as it was then, they are welcomed into the church, not just as people who are members of the church, but very much as leaders. There was an all-embracing sense of togetherness. And we hear about Apollos as being a great preacher. And later on we'll hear about him being named at a time of dissension, when people were sort of saying, I'm for Apollos, I'm for Paul, I'm for Peter. We are all for Christ. That's one of the messages that Apollos puts across very, very strongly, arguing in particular with Jewish people with the fact that Jesus fulfills the prophecies of the Old Testament. He is the Messiah. So we'll begin today by just thinking about the fact that we are all chosen, no matter who we are chosen to be leaders in the church. Some people are chosen to be leaders of the universal church, but we are all chosen to be leaders in our own community, to give an example of what Christian love truly means. God has, sorry, just got to put the microphone on. God has chosen me, God has chosen me to bring good news to the poor. God has chosen me, God has chosen me to bring new sight to those searching for light. God has chosen me, chosen me. And to tell the world that God's kingdom is near, to remove oppression and break down fear. Yes, God's time is near, God's time is near, God's time is near, God's time is near. God has chosen me, God has chosen me to set alight a new fire. God has chosen me, God has chosen me to bring to birth a new kingdom on earth. God has chosen me, chosen me. And to tell the world that God's kingdom is near, to remove oppression and break down fear. Yes, God's time is near, God's time is near, God's time is near, God's time is near. God is calling me, God is calling me, in all whose cry is unheard. God is calling me, God is calling me, to raise up the voice of with no power or choice. God has chosen me, is calling me. And to tell the world that God's kingdom is near, to remove oppression and break down fear. Yes, God's time is near, God's time is near, God's time is near, God's time is near. Apologies for one or two mistakes with the words. God is calling me to raise up the voice with no power or choice. God is calling each one of us in particular to stand alongside those who have no voice of their own, to stand alongside those who are oppressed. When we think about Apollos, we think about Paul, we think about people who were not part of the Jerusalem community. They were not people who walked with Jesus when Jesus was alive in this world as a human being. They're people who've come along later, but they are recognized and welcomed. And that's of real importance. The apostles were still alive. Those who walked with Jesus were still there. And they were very, very important, in particular for the foundation of the Gospels. Church communities would ask questions. What would Jesus do? Or what would Jesus say? They would turn to the apostles and they would tell them, and that's how the Gospels came to be written. But then when the apostles died out, then that was when we had the written down Gospels. We were able to keep on the message that the Gospel brings to us. With Apollos and with Paul, we have people who are not part of that inner sanctum, and yet they are great preachers. They are recognized and celebrated as leaders of the church. From the very beginning, church is intended to be open and welcoming to all people. Sadly, it's not always been the case. There are plenty of times, situations where people have been sidelined or people have been treated as second class. It's difficult to know to what extent women were sidelined in the early church. In the Gospels, we see women with the apostles, with Jesus, accepted very much on an equal footing. Jesus never rejected anybody. And yet women seem to disappear from the church fairly quickly. There's a cartoon on YouTube which states, it's like the apostles meeting the women after the resurrection and saying, thank you for being there with Jesus at the foot of the cross. Thank you for going to the grave. Thank you for witnessing the resurrection. We'll take it from here. Nobody knows exactly how it is that women became sidelined in the sense that they were not part of the mainstream of the church for a long time, and still today. Many roles in the church are not open to women, except vacuuming and cleaning the church. We've always allowed them to do that. If we think about the history of the church and its expansion, Christianity followed the soldiers who dominated many parts of the world. Christianity came after the destruction, but was it also part of that destruction? Was it hand in hand with the conquistadors as they conquered South America? There's a lot of blood in our hands, and not even to mention the times of fighting against Muslims, the Crusades. We think of all the bloodshed, the Protestant Reformation, bloodshed on both sides. There were more Protestants killed than there were Catholics. The reign of Bloody Mary is very much an appropriate epigraph. Today, there are lots of ways in which the church is open and welcoming. Our diocese has just recognized a group called Proud Catholics, which is a group of people represented by all those involved with the LGBT community. It's recognizing that these are people. There may be situations in the world where the church doesn't agree with people's choice lifestyle choice. But we do not reject people. We support and we help them as much as possible. If we think about a situation with abortion in this country, the Catholic Church is wholeheartedly against abortion, and yet the Catholic Church is the one organization that is very, very strong in supporting people, women who have had abortions. Project Rachel. It's a way of supporting people who have had abortions and then suffer psychologically from that. Medical profession, politicians, all the advocates of abortion refuse to accept that it even exists. We talk so much about mental health issues, never talk about mental health of people who've had abortions. The church is in many ways open and welcoming, and that's demonstrated from the very beginning. Apollos was a great preacher. He was somebody who was a great advocate of the church, a great supporter of the church, and he was welcomed as being a leader of the church. Leadership roles are roles that come to people in various ways. Those leadership roles must be embraced, must be recognized. Doesn't matter who we are. We all have an important role to play in the working of the church. We pray today for all of our leaders and for all Christians, that we may recognize that we are all leaders of our local communities. We are people who should be ready to give good example at all times to others. So thank you for listening and have a great day.